which is the legislation bill. So members, we move to consideration of the legislation bill, and the question is that part 1 stand part. Very moving speech. Honourable Leanne Dalzell.
Mr Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to address the committee stages of the legislation bill. As of course we're all aware, the legislation bill is designed to modernise and improve the law relating to the publication, availability, reprinting, revision and official versions of legislation, bringing them together in a single piece of legislation. So that is an excellent move with respect to this particular piece of legislation, and that is something that we all support in this House, and in fact we welcome it. I think that it is an important advance in the way that we are able to bring together the legislation into the one single format. Now, this bill was introduced to Parliament on the 25th of June 2010, and normally I would make some reflection as to the time that it's taken to return to the House and committee stages. I think Mr Chairman would know that I would be normally somewhat critical of such a delay. But I'm not critical of the delay in this particular instance, because I believe that the legislation is so important, and in many respects it's not the sort of legislation, as my husband might use the phrase, smokes your tyres, and he always uses that expression. Something that's particularly exciting is something that smokes your tyres. This doesn't normally smoke the tyres of anyone I know, but the truth is that it is really important legislation, and it's worthwhile taking the time in order to put the effort in and in order to make it really worthwhile. So for a lot of people that are tuning into their crystal sets tonight, they will be thinking that this is a very technical and a very dull bill. But I can assure those people who are listening tonight that this is anything but. Certainly for this side of the House and certain members really on both sides of the House. For a lot of members of the House, this will be a technical and dull bill, but for those of us who have been here for some time, they will know that it is a really important part of making sure that our legislation speaks to our modern environment rather than reflect that which has come before. There are elements around this particular law, though, that I do think that it is worth reflecting on as we deal with the legislation bill in committee stages. And I really would like the Attorney-General to speak to a particular issue that I want to put on the table, and it relates back to a former Leader of the House and Attorney-General, Sir Michael Cullen, who believed very strongly that the Parliamentary Counsel Office should report to the Leader of the House as opposed to the Attorney-General. And I feel that, I actually personally think that he was on the right track with that, and I really would like the Attorney to respond to that, because it was a comment made by a former Attorney. And the reason that I support it is that, in fact, the Leader of the House controls the agenda of the House. It controls the order paper, looks after the legislative program, and in fact I remember as a former minister having to negotiate quite a hard bargain from time to time to get bills that I wanted on that program. And often what was the point at which it was held back was when the Parliamentary Counsel Office wasn't able to prioritise that work. And so therefore, rather than having the Attorney being the Minister responsible for Parliamentary Counsel, it actually made good sense to have the Leader of the House with that particular role. And actually, the more that we debated this issue, because we did actually have quite a long discussion about this when we were in government, the more we had the discussion around the different roles that were brought to bear in this regard, there wasn't a vote, as it were, that sat with the role of Leader of the House, and it made good sense for the Parliamentary Council Office to actually be the basis for a vote to be allocated. And I'll give you an example, Mr Chairman, of where that might have worked, Mr Chairman. An example of where that particularly worked. And I want to go back perhaps about, well, it'd be more than 10 years now, back to when the last time the sale of liquor legislation was before the House with any sort of substantive amendments. And of course, in those days, all parties operated under a conscience vote. And as a result of a number of different amendments that were going to be moved during the committee stages of the sale of liquor amendment that we had in front of us at that time, the attorney was asked to make provision for parliamentary counsel to be available to private members, to individual members, to assist in the drafting of amendments. And the reason that this occurred was to ensure that under a conscience vote scenario, that if legislation was to be amended by way of a supplementary order paper by a member, that at least it was drafted in a form that would actually work. And again, that really reflected back to me, and I know that the I'm actually trying to remember who the minister was at the time. I know that Tony Ryle was the Minister of Justice when the legislation went through, but I can't recall whether it was still Doug Graham in those days who was the attorney. But whoever it was, they did make Parliamentary Council office available for the amendments that were going through. And it did strike me at the time that it would actually go a lot better with the role of Leader of the House, and in terms of the good order of the House around the question, particularly in conscience vote areas, and I know that there are fewer of those today, but it did seem to me that it made a lot of sense for that to occur. So I really would appreciate the attorney actually responding to that issue. I know that Sir Michael Cullen would have felt, well, I think he would appreciate the fact that the House was considering this particular issue in the context of the legislation bill in front of us tonight. So I do ask the attorney if he would respond to that particular question. I do actually think that it has a lot of merit, and I think I want to just mention one other example of when this particular issue came to light, and that was when I was part of a select committee that was looking at constitutional arrangements, and again this dates back a number of years, I think just prior to 2005, so it might have been 2004, 2005. I was involved in a small select committee that was established for the purpose of looking at constitutional arrangements, and I recall that Peter Dunn, I think, was the chair of that particular committee, and we traversed a whole range of different issues around constitutional matters, and this whole question of whether a vote should apply to the Leader of the House and whether there was grounds for particular support around some of the constitutional issues that would arise in terms of the House and the roles of private members did arise on that occasion as well. So even though it's not obviously a part of this bill in the sense that it was not a proposition that the government did pick up, I would actually appreciate having the attorney on record in response to that particular issue, because it is an important one. So on those comments, Mr Chairman, they really, the points that I really wanted to make was how important these sorts of legislative measures are, that there is a lot of serious work that goes on behind the scenes to modernise the rules around legislation. I think for legislation to be accessible and available to people, generally, then it does have to, we do have to have a serious look at these kinds of legislative improvements from time to time. The Select Committee looked at the regulations disallowance changes proposed in the bill as well. The provisions in the bill that separate the publication and the disallowance of delegated legislation and the broad definition of disallowable instrument. That's designed to ensure that there will be parliamentary oversight of the use of delegated powers by the executive and make it more difficult to avoid disallowance. I also agree with that. I think it's very important that we are able to hold the executive to account, which is the proper process of the Regulations Review Committee and parliamentary process in general.
Call Charles Chevelle.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. Mr Chairman, I want to just rise and make a couple of points about Part 1.